Okay, everyone. Good evening again. The meeting is now live to the public and being recorded. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome to members of the public, councillors and honorary aldermen to East Devon District Council's virtual extraordinary council meeting on Wednesday, the 24th of June, 2020. I am your chair, Councillor Cathy Gardner. I would also like to welcome anyone watching the meeting via the live streaming. All participants here today are taking part remotely and the committee is being viewed online and recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout the meeting and please be very careful with your language. May I also remind members that the Code of Conduct applies throughout the meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. As this meeting is dependent on internet connection and a power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or a power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. If we are not able to reconnect after 15 minutes, the meeting will be adjourned and reconvened at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for further details if necessary. Please, will all members please make sure all microphones are muted when you are not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. Please keep your points short and do not interrupt when someone else is speaking. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic blue hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting. Any members of the public who want to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website at www.eastdevon.gov.uk. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of all members here present. Can you please now unmute your microphone, and when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you have confirmed you are present, please mute your microphone again. Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
Here.
Councillor Armstrong.
Present.
Councillor Arnott.
Present.
Councillor Bailey.
Present.
Councillor Barrow.
Present.
Councillor Bickley.
Present.
Councillor Blakey.
Present.
Councillor Bloxham.
Present.
Councillor Bond.
Present.
Councillor Brown.
Present.
Councillor Cahill.
Present.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Present.
Councillor Chapman.
Present.
Councillor Chubb.
Present.
Councillor Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Davey.
Present.
Councillor Desaram.
Present.
Councillor Dent.
Present.
Councillor Faithful.
Present.
Councillor Gardner.
Present.
Councillor Gazzard.
Present.
Councillor Hartnell.
Present.
Councillor Hawkins.
Present.
Councillor Hayward.
Present.
Councillor Hookway.
Present.
Councillor Howe.
Present.
Councillor Hughes.
Present.
Councillor Ingham.
Present.
Councillor Jackson.
Present.
Councillor Jarvis.
Present.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Johns.
Present.
Councillor Young.
Present.
Councillor Key.
Present.
Councillor King.
Present.
Councillor Ledger.
Present.
Councillor Loudon.
Present.
Councillor Manley.
Present.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Present.
Councillor Miller. Councillor Miller? No. Councillor Moulding?
Present.
Councillor Parr?
Present.
Councillor Pook?
Present.
Councillor Pratt?
Present.
Councillor Ranger?
Present.
Councillor Rickson?
Present.
Councillor Rowland?
Present.
Councillor Rylance?
Present.
Councillor Skinner?
Present.
Councillor Taylor?
Present.
Councillor Thomas?
Present.
Councillor Twist?
Present.
Councillor Whibley?
Present.
Councillor Woodward?
Present.
Councillor Ragg?
Present.
Councillor Chris Wright?
Present.
Councillor Tom Wright?
Present.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I can confirm we are quorate today. Agenda item 1, public speaking. No members of the public have registered to speak. Agenda item 2, apologies. We have some apologies. Can those please be read out? Thank you.
Yes, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillors Ian Hall, Councillor Tony McLaughlin, Chris Pepper and Honorary Alderman Francis New. That's it.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest? If anyone does have a declaration of interest, can you please raise your blue hand now? Please remember to unmute yourselves and advise the type of interest and the reason. I don't see any blue hands. Moving on to agenda item 4. Governance arrangements and committee appointments for the remainder of the civic year 2020-2021. We have in front of us a report by the Chief Executive and Monitoring Officer to enable the Council to formalise its governance arrangements for the remainder of the civic year, following the cancellation of the annual meeting in May due to COVID-19 and the change in the administration of the Council. Can I invite the Monitoring Officer to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So as you just said, the report facilitates the Council setting its government arrangements and enabling its committees to be properly constituted and back up and running for the remainder of this civic year. Obviously, most of you will remember from May that this is a very procedural step, but it is necessary that the various stages are gone through as they flow on from each other. And so therefore each part and recommendation need to be taken in order. In that sense, there are 6 particular parts. The first is the Constitution, and that sets the committee structure and the number of seats. Secondly is to confirm the opposition. That flows on the assumption that the amendment in the Constitution is agreed, but that formally recognises the opposition. The third stage is to agree the political balance and the number of seats across the committees for each of the parties, and then how those seats are balanced across the committees. The fourth step is then the membership of the Standards and Housing Review Board committees. Fifth stage is the membership, that is the group elections to the committees. And then finally, it is the appointment of the chairs and vice chairs of the various committees. I don't intend to go through the report as it's all detailed in the paperwork that is in front of you. I'm happy to take any questions there may be on the various stages as we get to them. There are some amendments though that I need to draw to your attention, please. The first set was circulated around lunchtime today, but for the benefit of the public who won't have seen it, those changes are in relation to the areas of responsibility for the portfolio holders. Firstly, the addition of car parks and beach huts to the asset and economy portfolio, and then the movement of development management and building control from assets and economy to strategic planning. In the list of joint bodies, which is in part 3, section 2, the addition of the East Devon Traveller Forum, which is a body which was set up in year and needs to be added. In the Cabinet terms of reference, and this is for the next two changes essentially, arising from the discussions the other day by Cabinet on approval of virements, there needs to be a tidying up change, which is to acknowledge that the portfolio holders have the authority to approve virements and that Cabinet will receive reports on such decisions. Next change is just a consistency change to replace the head of economy in one of the delegations to the strategic lead for housing, health and environment to refer to the service lead for place, assets and commercialisation. And then finally, in the rules of procedure, and this is to tie in with a change that is in the report, the addition of the word normally at the start of a sentence, which essentially therefore permits the issuing of agendas in with less than 5 clear days, which is permissible in law. And as I say, that's a tidying up change. The only other amendment I need to draw to your attention, I'll do it now in case just to make sure I don't forget. In Part D, the makeup of the Standards Committee and the Housing Review Board, you'll note from the papers that one of the members, one of the co-opted members, a lady called Pat Gore, she has resigned her post, and I've been notified of that today. So she needs to be removed. And for the membership to note that a replacement will be elected in due course, along with the other vacancy on that committee, as and when we're permitted to do so, bearing in mind the COVID restrictions. So those are the changes. And as I say, Chair, I'm very happy to answer any questions that might arise as we go through.
Thank you. I think Councillor Paul Miller may have joined the meeting.
Thank you. Sorry for my lateness there. Yes, I've joined the meeting. Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Henry, for running through those. Members can please refer to the report of the Chief Executive and Monitoring Officer in your agenda papers. I will now go through the recommendations one by one and seek your comments and approval. Part A, recommendation 1, that the Council approves the amended constitution as shown in the draft and detailed in the report, and thereby agree the committee structure, their size and terms of reference, and the scheme of delegations. I will move the recommendation from the chair. Those members wishing to speak, please indicate by raising a blue hand. We will take as many speakers as possible. Please note, however, don't repeat something that somebody else has already said. That would be much appreciated. And I think I will pass over to one of the officers to take the questions in order, but the first I can see on the list is the leader, Councillor Paul Arnott. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, very much. We are being invited tonight to approve the recommendations to amend our constitution. The item and the associated item coming later have both been identified as low risk. Despite this, I understand there may be an effort this evening to amend the motion to exclude Cabinet members from both the planning and the licensing committees. There have also been a fair few emails flying around on this topic, and even now I can sense Conservative members, even some new ones, readying to leap forward, so I'll not detain Council unduly. Briefly, let's look first at some of what else we are being asked to approve tonight. On page 6, item 6, we are being asked to approve an investigative and disciplinary committee. The officer's note reads, while the Council's framework was legally permissible, it did not replicate the arrangements that were advised to be in place. Yes. Let's look also at page 8, rules of procedure at item 15. Quote, in the light of recent events, it is considered appropriate that the Council formally agree at the annual meeting which party is the formal opposition. Of course we should do that. Question on both of these matters is why on earth this has never happened before. Perhaps it's overdue now, but it is satisfactory that after due consideration over a period of weeks and months, the officers have finally addressed it. In that context, in this low-risk agenda, it is silent on the matter of whether Cabinet members may sit on planning and licensing, even though this agenda was drafted some time ago after the nominees had been submitted. Similarly, one might say, why has this not been addressed before, 7 years after a planning scandal that engulfed the Conservatives in East Devon? Well, tonight, perhaps, some of those same Conservatives are going to try and use the opportunity of this meeting to block appointments by amending this motion. Because of that, and always needing a plan B in case this happens and that vote is won, we of the Democratic Alliance have, of course, identified, reluctantly, potential replacements, who we very much hope not to have to deploy. I want Council to understand that for planning, they would have to be, for there are no other, 2 working mothers of school-aged children and a full-time female worker in a key British industry. These aren't retired gentlefolk who can afford to spend the time on a planning committee all day with a full day of preparations. They are fantastic board members, but we should not be forcing them to step up when there are others willing and able to do the job. As leader of the Democratic Alliance, the people put forward for planning are the best for this council and the public interest. The reasons are that planning must sit again urgently after the COVID-19 break, and they have all been on the committee, fully trained and able for the last year. Among the number of the 3 cabinet members involved are 2 ex-mayors of major communities and one of the most respected and long-serving councillors at county and district of recent decades. Simply, the public interest is best served by their service to the planning committee of this council. We hear, and may hear lots of, much talk of public perception. I do not understand this. Our great friends at Cambridge District Council have 4 cabinet members serving on the planning committee, and I have checked with them. They have not been inundated with complaints or been affected by public perception. South Somerset is the same too. The other factor advanced is that litigious developers will be minded to sue. But why? I have every confidence that if there is a perceived conflict of interest on an application because the member also happens to sit on cabinet, Mr. Gordon-Lennox will advise and they will simply recuse themselves. Now, if either I as leader or Dan Ledger as portfolio holder for strategic planning were on the planning committee, yes, there would be problems, but we are not. I will not attribute motive to any member here today. For many of them, of course, this is a genuine debating point, and I accept that. However, I also find myself, as leader of the council, needing to find a mature solution to this. Therefore, this morning, I have been in contact with the Local Government Association, Paul Clark, who, as many of you know, is now the South West Regional Lead. And he has spoken on our behalf to the Local Government Association's Planning Advisory Service. And as part of that conversation, he has advised them that EDDC wishes for an independent, peer-led planning advisory service process reviewing our planning committee governance arrangements as a matter of urgency. I have advised that we would wish this to happen at the earliest possible moment. Now, I didn't go off and do this on my own before I brought this to you. I wanted to see what our Chief Executive Officer had to say on the matter as well. And Mark kindly replied, "Dear Paul, thank you for this. The principle of a planning advisory service assessment / review would be welcomed. We have used them in the past, a review of the local plan before it was submitted for examination, and found their advice to be helpful. I'd be happy to support the proposal." Thank you, Mark. So with those reassurances in place, I am hopeful that the majority of this council will vote for this motion unamended. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, the next speaker we have is Councillor Ingham.
Thank you. It's interesting how the new leader has highlighted this one concern. Having gone through the proposed changes for the Constitution, I see it not what the changes are, but what's been left out. And this one issue, I think, is of grave concern because we've always traditionally in East Devon avoided taking this risk, whether it's low, medium, high, we've avoided it. And I know last year this subject was broached and I discussed it with the monitoring officer, I discussed it with the CEO a few times, went back to Cabinet, then back to them again, and we took their advice. And that was not to appoint any portfolio holders to the licensing or what's now the planning committee. So I'd be reticent about taking that risk when there is an alternative. And I'm fairly confident that if the current leadership tries, they can find an appropriate solution. But I'd really like us to fill that hole and make sure it doesn't happen again, because why would we want to take an unnecessary risk? I don't understand that. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Ian Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased actually to see that Councillor Arnott's making some positive developments now in regards to planning and some of the issues we highlighted on that. But for me, it doesn't actually change the immediate requirement in hand. So with that in mind, I wish to propose an amendment to the draft constitution before us this evening. My amendment is straightforward, consistent with both prevailing advice of our monitoring officer and the practice followed by successive recent council administrations. The proposed amendments relate to Part 3, Responsibility for Functions, Section 2, covering the terms of reference and delegated powers of committees. An identical amendment to be appended to the membership section of both Licensing and Enforcement Committee, page 65, Planning Committee, page 71. The proposed amendment is serving members of Cabinet are not eligible for appointment to this committee. As members will be aware, the independents have politely asked several pertinent questions of our new leadership over the last few weeks. Securing substantive answers has not always been easy, but we're particularly grateful to the leader for clarity in his email last evening and our monitor officer for clear, concise confirmation of his professional opinion this morning. I've set aside numerous irrelevant considerations and personalised comment such that we effectively face a simple choice. The leaders received the same professional advice from our monitoring officer as I did as leader in 2018, and that presented to Ben and Susie in 2019. Advice confirmed to us all this morning is clear and unequivocal in judging the wisdom of the appointment of serving Cabinet members to licensing and planning committees. In the background, there is currently no formal legal or constitutional restriction on Cabinet members sitting on planning or licensing committees. That's correct. However, the Council permits up to 4 Cabinet members to sit on Strategic Planning Committee. Well, why is that? Firstly, legislation states that planning and licensing functions should not be the role of Cabinet. As these committees are separate decision-making bodies, it's not appropriate for Cabinet members to sit on them. Planning and licensing committees specifically determine other people's rights, whereas the Strategic Planning Committee generally does not. Rather, it makes a recommendation to full council where we members decide. This explains why it's acceptable for Cabinet members to sit on Strategic Planning Committee, but not planning or licensing. The reasoning, much though it's easy to dispense of this trivially, is perception. People believe that Cabinet members may lead a particular outcome either intentionally or unintentionally. The risk to the Council of a Cabinet's members' involvement in the process may be it being used in appeals or to bolster judicial review grounds. It can avoid avoidable complaints to the Council, and similarly the reputation of the Council can be affected by generalised criticism. In conclusion, I'm deeply concerned that our Constitution as drafted does not offer our Council adequate protection against a potential ill-advised move to appoint serving Cabinet members to licensing or planning committees. Any Cabinet member appointments to these decision-making bodies, defined specifically as outside the role of Cabinet, will be dangerously against the consistent, long-standing professional advice of both our monitoring officer and council solicitors. please reflect for a moment. Cast aside any political preconceptions, then be confident your valued personal support of this amendment is clearly in the best interests of both your council and East Devon District Council residents. Thank you. And could we ask for a recorded vote, please, Chair, on this amendment, if it ultimately comes that far?
Yes, we will need to confirm that in a moment. Henry, do we want to ask for a seconder for that amendment now?
Yes, I think you should, Chair, and I think probably you ought to have to see if you can get a seconder, not see if you can, if there is a seconder for a recorded vote as well, so at least we understand where we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to second the amendment as moved by Ian Thomas, Councillor Ian Thomas? I've got Councillor Mike Howe, you have your hand up. Are you putting your hand up to second that amendment?
I'm happy to second that amendment, but I would leave it to others because I think I might have an amendment to make to the amendment later on. So I will speak after that, but if there is no seconder, I will second it happily.
Okay. Would somebody like to speak up to second Councillor Thomas's amendment?
Councillor Bond's waving her hand.
Not able to see waved hands, sorry. I can't see everybody at once.
My blue hand is up anyway, and Tom Wright's waving, so whatever you like, Chairman.
Councillor Bond, do you wish to second the amendment?
I do wish to second the amendment, thank you, and the recorded vote. I just wanted to, yes, thank you, Chairman, but I would like to second Councillor Thomas's amendment. But I can only really describe it as disappointing, the leader's decision not to reconsider his committee appointments, all the more so in the light of our own legal officer's advice. Bluntly, the decision has been taken to seek instead the advice of a planning officer from another council, selectively shopping around until the advice you get suits your situation isn't illegal, but is the advice obtained in the best interests of this council and the people of East Devon. Perception is key. You're absolutely right, Councillor Arnott, absolutely key. By packing the regulatory committees with cabinet members, you are reversing the transparency of former practice in a move that will be widely interpreted as seeking to exert undue influence. Over this last week, I have urged you, Leader, to reconsider the proposed composition of committees, but you've chosen not to. We therefore had no alternative but to protect the best interests of the people we all represent by moving this amendment. The people of East Devon deserve open and transparent government, not the local equivalent of some Orwellian nightmare. I therefore urge all councillors to support this amendment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mike Howe, would you like to speak now?
Yes, I'm happy to speak, and I have an alternative, which if it becomes necessary. I am more than happy to support Councillor Thomas and Councillor Ian Thomas' proposal, but I do have a caveat with that, is that I feel, as well as the damage that would be done if we don't do something like this, to the perception of the public of our council, and our council has suffered over years, not purely because of the makeup of the council, but because of the way it's being perceived by the public. And that will not change who's at helm. It will change by actions and motives. And having cabinet members on the statutory quasi-judicial committees is not the best plan for the public or anyone else. Now, I'll come to what I suggest as a possible compromise, and obviously that's up to the council as a whole, but I will propose it later, if necessary, is I am happy, actually, for Councillor Ragg to chair it as a cabinet member without portfolio. That's for planning committee, because many councils do operate that way, and they don't have a problem with one cabinet member as a singular on that basis. But I cannot, in my heart, and after going around this district as chairman of development management in the olden days, and see the people's faces and listen to their concerns, sit here and let this sort of problem happen again. It is will be an absolute untenable position. And as I say, I'm happy to support the current proposal. I'm also happy if East Devon Alliance, the leader, etc., wants a compromise, I'm happy with that. If Councillor Thomas would accept it, but that's a secondary matter. But more than happy to go along with the proposal as it stands. Thank you.
Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chair. This is a stupid amendment. I think I'd like to ask Councillor Thomas, can he name a time where any cabinet member on a planning committee has ever been brought for judicial review? Has it ever happened? No, it hasn't. The advice, the guidance is very clear. You shouldn't be on the planning committee if you're the leader of the council, and you shouldn't be on the planning committee if you're portfolio holder with responsibility for planning stuff. Now, in that respect, we've not nominated anybody that has those responsibilities. Therefore, we are complying with the national guidelines, and there's no guidelines that suggest otherwise. So I really don't understand why this amendment has been brought. Personally, I am the portfolio holder for democracy and transparency. I take it very seriously. The suggestion that it's inappropriate for members of the cabinet to sit on DMC or planning committee, but it's unfounded, I'm afraid. And I think I urge members to vote against this amendment because it's rubbish. And I personally feel as though it's deliberately been brought by certain members who seek to undermine the new administration. Thank you very much.
Councillor Tom Wright.
Thank you, Chair. I'm speaking mainly on the aspect of the licensing committee, and I've got great concern about the departure from the precedent we've always had on this council. As has been pointed out, this is a quasi-judicial committee where decisions can be challenged in a law court. And there has been a fairly recent example of this. I am glad to say the decision of the committee, then under the chairmanship of Councillor Steve Hall, was upheld in the courts. The Licensing Act is clear. In deciding issues, the only facts that can be considered are prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children. The law states quite clearly they are the only matters that can be taken into account when determining any application. Cabinet members will inevitably be more aware than other members of drivers, policies and priorities that they may take into considering when deciding an issue. For example, the licensing committee sets charges and fees. To have the portfolio holder for finance on the committee would naturally raise perceptions that perhaps he would be overly concerned with the financial aspects of the issue. I would have thought that the portfolio holder for transparency would have been sensitive to this perception, but no, he is sitting on the committee alongside the finance portfolio holder. A bit of history now. When I first became a district councillor, I was a member of the licensing committee and was pleased to serve. For some years, I'd been head of the licensing and prosecutions department in Thames Valley Police when Milton Keynes was rapidly expanding with all kinds of licensed premises coming on stream. And later, I was an area commander dealing with the impact of very large licensed premises, and I was able to bring that experience to the table. However, when I became a deputy portfolio holder and therefore a member of cabinet, I was advised by our legal team that I should no longer serve on that committee, and I reluctantly accepted that advice. And I would also add that I am very disappointed to see the former chairman of this committee replaced. Councillor Jarvis was an excellent chairman, and we benefited from his years of experience in performing the same role for Plymouth City Council. Perhaps he was truly too independent. That's all I want to say. The only other thing is cabinet members are very busy people, and I would have thought that sitting on these committees might have been a role too far, and I'm hoping it does not mean there's a dearth of talent on the other councillors unwilling to sit on these important committees. Thank you.
Councillor De Sauren.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates specifically to, well, item 15, and probably will be dealt with later under item 30. Basically, research suggests from the Local Government Association carried out a case study on Stroud District Council as part of a training exercise when Stroud found itself with no overall control in 2012. It was noted that the Chief Executive made time to communicate with the Conservative group. The CEO said it was important to make sure that they were not excluded, particularly as they were the largest group. My question to either Henry or the leader tonight, based on this case study and as the agenda indicates, if we the Conservatives are to be recognised as the official opposition resulting from this meeting, then going forward, can you please confirm that, that we in this capacity will get an equal amount of officer time to assist with ward queries and in particular policy formation issues such as how to deal with the economy post-COVID-19, as Mike Allen's economic thoughts, which were raised at a previous overview meeting where it was found that this thing that Mike Allen had raised will require officer time to read and work through with Councillor Allen, as was noted at the time. So that's what I really wanted to clarify. Obviously, I appreciate we're not at part B yet, but I'm not sure, obviously, whether we will get that far insofar as we've got to vote on these other items that we've discussed. And I'd be very grateful if I were to receive a response. Thank you so much for your indulgence, members.
Chair, if you're I don't know whether you wanted either Mark or I to comment now, but I would suggest it's probably picked up in part B, if that's okay.
Okay, that's fine. Thank
you.
Sorry, next speaker, please.
Councillor Jess Bailey.
Thank you. I think I've considered this really quite carefully. And I like to think that I apply the same principles regardless of which political group or which political party is doing any particular action. So for me, the key question is, does the filling of the committees in this way increase the risk of decisions of the council being challenged? And I personally believe that it does. And does our head of legal advise against it? Yes, he does. So, you know, I'm risk averse, and I think that I would follow through with this, regardless of who was seeking to fill a licensing or planning committee. And I need to be consistent, and that's the view that I hold.
Can I ask, Henry, do you want to make a comment at this point? Because you have been brought into this by a couple of speakers. Do you have anything to, do you want to add anything? Please don't feel obliged, but you might like to.
Are you, sorry, you're asking in relation to the Part A amendment that's being proposed, effectively?
Yes, I mean, a couple of speakers have commented on the advice that you've given about the position of cabinet members. If you have anything you'd like to add, then please do, but it's up to you.
Thank you. I don't think I need to add anything beyond what's already been said so far. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we move on to the next speaker, please?
Yes, the next speaker is Councillor Moulding.
Yes, thank you very much. And Chairman, thank you for allowing me to speak, and the members of our group. And I wish to make a few points and possibly questions, which I hope in a while the leader will be able to answer, and he may want to jot these questions down. So I firstly want him to explain exactly why, when he received advice from the monitoring officer regarding appointments on quasi-judicial positions, he decided to go against that advice and plough forward with his own ideas of how he wanted each committee to be formed. Because there is no doubt that in time this will bring the council into disrepute. It may be legally permissible, but it is perception by the public, and that will be intense. And my view is also, as Councillor Bailey has just said, that this will open up considerable risk for this council, and I wouldn't want that to happen. Henry Gordon-Lennox advised that there was a great amount of risk, and again, why do you go against that advice? In my view, there will be regular conflicts of interest for portfolio holders to consider at meetings. And finally, it is my view that those who vote for these appointments and vote against the amendment from Councillor Thomas are actually condoning the lack of probity within this leadership. Thank you.
Next speaker is Councillor Allen.
Thank you. Well done, Kathy, for handling this very difficult meeting. Two comments. First of all, with regard to the immediate motion, I've spent, ever since I was on the council, up until this year, sorry, on one or other of the planning committees or both. And one of the biggest problems is predetermination. And any time that there is a clear evidence of predetermination, then that decision can be overturned, even though a lot of people may have wanted that particular decision to go forward. To risk gagging portfolio holders in this way is a problem for me, because this means that every time a portfolio holder makes a statement about the things they want to happen, then it's taken into account by any appellant in regard of planning issues or licensing issues. So effectively, what this proposal that the leader of cabinet has put forward is actually a way of gagging himself, unless he's prepared, and other members that he's put forward are prepared, to put up with predetermination issues all the way through their administration. I do want to make some comments about some of the other items on the agenda. So could Councillor Gardner give me some clarity as to whether we're coming back to those issues or I should be addressing them right now?
It would be preferable to address them now, because most of the other recommendations really are straightforward approval of facts and not really open to debate. If you've got issues to relate it to the changes to the Constitution, those should be raised now. Right. Well then, with your indulgence, on page 6 and point 6, investigating and disciplinary committee, I was involved and in fact urged John Loudon to put this forward in the last administration, and he didn't find the time. I'm delighted to see that it's going forward now on regularising the national JNC conditions of service. I would like to make sure that all members of SMT are included, and maybe you would consider that, Mr. Arnott. The next thing I want to refer to is on page 8 and relates to the lead members. Now, lead members in various ways have been completely helpful and very much gingering up. They used to be called champions of particular issues in the council. And the fact that lead members or champions are being abandoned now seems not to have been justified at all. I can't see any evidence that it will improve transparency or accountability in the council. It's a great shame, and I would ask that this particular item would be referred to the overview committee or the governance subgroup to actually look much more carefully at this area, because actually member champions or lead members can ginger up the council in all sorts of ways in a non-political way, and they're very, very valuable. And over the years, we've had a great benefit from that building up of expertise, because people have concentrated on particular things. So I'm very disappointed
and wondered if Councillor Arnott and the team would consider referring it to Nick Hookway's committee, because I think that would do it a great deal of good to be reviewed there. Thank you, Chair. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you. Before we move on to the next speaker, can I just ask, would the leader like to comment now or hold back until everyone has spoken?
I'm happy
Councillor
to
Arnott?
hold back.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, hello. I'm happy to hold back, but I've got the questions written down from Councillor Mouldy and Councillor Allen in particular. Thank you, Chair, and I'll come to those.
Thank you very much. I think the next speaker is Councillor Megan Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair. I think I've got 3 things to say. Just get my notes. Sorry about this. One is, I'm not quite sure. I wanted to ask the leader, what is the relevance of the Planning Advisory Service to this debate that we're having now? I really don't, I'm just confused by it. And I'm not sure what the intention is for it and how it's going to affect what we're actually trying to decide upon right now. So that's one question which the leader can probably come back to me later about. And I just wanted to say a second thing, that I sat on the licensing committee for 4 years, the first 4 years. And I really wanted to sit on it again. But I was strongly advised by the monitoring officer that it's for the reasons we've already talked about this evening, and how he's explained in his emails, that it wouldn't be a wise move because I'm a portfolio holder. So I think, like Councillor Wright said, I reluctantly then decided not to, even though I really wanted to be on that committee. But then I find out later, this was weeks ago, so then I find out a few weeks later that 2 cabinet members are going to be on there. And it just worries me for the reasons that other people have mentioned. And I just feel that I want it to go with my own conscience and the advice that had been given by the monitoring officer. So I really feel that at the moment I am minded to support Councillor Thomas's amendment for those reasons. And I hope people will understand the reasons why. I just feel that it's not right. For my principles, my conscience, and it's not right for the council. I think we're opening the council up to could be some serious difficulties if this goes ahead. Thank you very much.
The next speaker is Councillor Hayward.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bond earlier referred to Teignbridge District Council and South Somerset District Council as a selective choice of advice and precedent in what the leader has put forward. Well, of course, Teignbridge District Council are one of our partners in GESP. So it appears that if we trust them on GESP, but not on planning and democracy. So either we believe that Teignbridge District Council are acting lawfully and in a way that engenders positive public perception in allowing 4 cabinet members to sit on their planning committees, or we don't. And if we don't, should we be getting into bed with them as a partner on something as important as GESP, which, as you'll be aware, is a planning consideration? So it just seems some double standards coming forward there. Now, of course, that criticism of Teignbridge District Council, and I'm sure that Teignbridge District Council councillors are watching, could be construed as overt criticism. So we may have a problem going down the line that we seem to be wanting to, play with their toys, but we don't trust them. So I'm afraid I find that statement bizarre. In the news only recently, in fact, every day for the last 4 weeks, we've had reports of our housing minister, Mr. Jenrick, embroiled in scandal after scandal of planning. Now, if Mr. Jenrick, MP, housing minister, were a councillor, he would be in front of the Standards Committee already for what he has done. And yet I do not see letters and letters to the Telegraph from the Conservative members here lambasting him for his abuse of the planning system. Because this is nothing about cabinet members sitting on planning. This is surely about ensuring that the right...
Point of order, Chair. I've actually gone on Twitter criticising Generic, so please would Councillor Hayward not generalise.
Excuse me, Councillor Allen, that is not actually a point of order. That's a personal comment. Thank you. Please carry on, Paul Councillor.
Thank you. I was, of course, referring to letters, but thank you, Chair, for clarifying that. So this is about making sure that the right people are based on the right committees with their experience and their availability to make honest, open and policy-based decisions in the public gaze. Now, every councillor sitting here who serves should recuse themselves at DMC and licensing if the need arises. But I'm afraid some councillors in this chamber have failed to disclose interests in the past, be they prior meetings with developers or close personal family friendships, private membership of clubs and associations, but they still sit amongst us on those committees. And I find that hypocrisy staggering. And members of the new opposition, or opposition to be, let's say, are judging this administration on their own standards. And by which I refer, of course, to the insidious behaviour of Councillor Colin Brown, who was not on the planning committee. Sorry, Colin Brown, my apologies.
Graham Brown.
I do apologise. Councillor Brown, my sincere apologies. A former Councillor Graham Brown, who of course didn't sit on the planning committees, but was plastered all over the front of the Telegraph and caused more harm to this council than anyone else in its history. The public perception of this council was dragged into the mud by a Conservative councillor who did not sit on planning, but he still weaseled his way in and quoted, if no one gets planning, sorry, if I can't get planning, nobody will. And yet he was found not wanting. He was found not guilty, nothing to see here, and yet banged to rights on the front of a mainstream daily paper. So what I finally finish on this point is that we're all governed by the Nolan principles. They are the principles that represent the moral compass that each of us as a councillor are perceived by the public. That's what we're judged on, our actions, not whether we, which way we decide or to predetermine views. We know we're not allowed to have predetermined views. We can have predisposed views, but not predetermined ones. And each and every one of those Nolan principles sets out clearly why a member, cabinet member or otherwise, would recuse themselves from a planning decision if they believe they were predetermined or had an interest. So we must be selfless. We act only in the public interest. We must have integrity. We avoid placing ourselves under obligation to any third party. And I stress that one, no obligation to third parties. Objectivity, they're made purely decisions on impartial and on merit. We're accountable to the public in everything we do. And all of you have heard these, you've all read them. These are the gospel of being a councillor. We are open. We do it in an open and transparent way. We are all honest. That's what we all stand by. We do things honestly. And finally, we all support the Nolan principles by the principle of leadership. So I'm afraid I don't support this amendment because we put the right people in the right roles for the greater benefit of East Devon. And regardless of which administration is in power, which political party, what coloured hat or rosette we're wearing, the same rules apply to all of us. And I'm afraid if some councils do, and I hear this thing, well, traditionally we haven't, generally we haven't, things move on. If we stuck to tradition, then people would be washing their clothes on a rock on the river. We don't. We have washing machines now. We've moved on. Things move on and time moves on. This whole issue of how we're conducting meetings now shows we adapt, we evolve in the public interest. And to stick to things because we've always done it just makes me hark back to former Councillor Brown. That's what we used to do and we don't anymore. Thank you, Chair.
Next speaker is Councillor Ragg.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, in response to Councillor Bond's somewhat emotive response, I believe that she owes Councillor Arnott an apology. Councillor Arnott did not go shopping around. I find that quite insulting to a man of his integrity. What happened was I've been offered support and advice as deputy leader of this council by my political party, the national one, who gave me a local contact, who is Councillor Alan Connett, leader of the Liberal Democrats on Devon County Council, and he's on Teignbridge District Council. So I emailed him yesterday because we want to be completely above board with all of this. And I believe that we are. And he got back to me and told me that, yes, 4 members, cabinet members, serve on DMC at Teignbridge. And there have been absolutely no problems whatsoever in the time that they've been serving. So that, I'm afraid, is a bit of a red herring. In reply to Tom Wright, it's not that people aren't willing to serve certainly not on planning or licensing. It is because of they're younger people who've stood for election, and they should be welcomed with open arms, not come in for criticism, because they cannot, through work commitments, childcare commitments, they can't spend a whole day at planning. It's impossible. And they wouldn't be able to afford it either. Who's going to pay their childcare? Anybody here with the council? So no, I think, and because we've carried on from previous administrations, same old, same old, same old, it's tired. We don't have to do it. There is nothing illegal about what we're proposing to do. It's time that this council refreshed itself, frankly. So I really do think the allegations that Councillor Bond made are false, and I'd like to see her do the ladylike thing and apologise to Councillor Arnott.
Chairman, could I come back in, as I've been named twice now?
Yes, Councillor Bond.
Thank you very much. So in response to Paul Hayward, Councillor Hayward, I didn't mention Teignbridge and I didn't mention South Somerset. What I was saying was you've chosen as an administration to get advice from planning officers from different councils rather than relying on our own legal advice from our monitoring officer, just because it presumably suited what you wanted to do. So I think that's, I think so. There's no shaking your head, Eileen. That's basically what happened.
If I might respond to that, I didn't finish. What I should have said was that if the advice from Councillor Connett was to seek advice from the Local Government Association Planning Advisory Service. So again, another apology, please, Councillor Bond, to Councillor Arnott.
I'm not going to apologise for something that you've just told me that you didn't say when you were saying it, when you were speaking. This is now getting ridiculous. Can we move on, please?
Thank you, Councillor Bond. I want to avoid people repeating themselves, and if you've already spoken, I won't be calling you to speak again. So the next person I can see with a blue hand, apart from the leader who has to come back and comment to some things that have been said already, I think, if I'm correct, is Councillor Key, please. And before I move on and close my microphone, can everybody who's not speaking, please make sure you're muted. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to refer to Councillor Miller's comments. In actual fact, I didn't think that the word stupid was very appropriate. Has he not got a little bit better vocabulary in that? I was on the planning committee and have been for 21 years, and I have not known any judicial review being brought forward because we never had any portfolio holders actually on the committee. So just to put him correct, I think if he speaks again, he must get his facts right. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Key has spoken, so I have a right of reply. I maintain it's a stupid amendment, absolutely is. And I'd like to say that there's been no judicial review brought against any other council in the country on this. So
thank you, Councillor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Councillor Key, had you finished your point, Councillor Key?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes.
Thank you. I think now then we move to Councillor Skinner, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And on this point, it is quite a very serious point. In my role as Deputy Leader and Economy Portfolio Holder, I find the Portfolio Holder for Economy, whose role should be to be out there pushing to increase the economic agenda. How do you balance a role of pushing an economic agenda and then be seen to be voting on such issues if indeed those agendas are coming back through the planning process? It leaves the particular member for Economy open to predetermination, and I can see nothing but problems arising from this. It would be far more sensible to do as I used to do, and that was when an agenda particular issue came up at the planning committee, that you're not a member of the planning committee, but the economic portfolio holder could go along to speak, to actually drive that economic agenda of which he should be out there driving along. This particular role is absolutely so fundamentally important, particularly in the place as to where we are now, that jobs and growth is going to be absolutely key to the survival of not only this particular authority, Devon as a whole, but UK as a whole. It appears to me, Madam Chairman, that this administration is only narrowing the members of which it's been fighting for a very long time about openness and transparency down to just a few. I find that a great shame when, if there is a majority that they claim to have of 24 members, that you can't find the members to actually put in place to sit on the committees of which they should be doing. My second point, which I'll raise at this point, and as you asked Councillor Allen to speak on all points as he had the floor at that time, will be the issue regarding portfolio holders sat on the committees is a little short full of knowledge. For example, it's been mentioned about South Somerset. Well, I know for a fact that South Somerset have the system in place of which we used to have on this council, and that is that all members of Somerset actually sit on planning. So the reason why members that would be portfolio holders would be sat on South Somerset planning committees is because every member of South Somerset district council members are all sat on planning. So they don't have a choice to pull away from that because that is the system that they had in place. We had that in place here at East Devon District Council. We had 3 planning committees and every member of the council was sat on their respective area planning committees. We moved away from that and moved to a core planning committee, drawing members from different areas of East Devon to ensure that there is a balance across the piece to cover all of the area of East Devon. I'm not advocating, by the way, Madam Chairman, that is necessarily what we do here, but what I am advocating is, as many members have said before, there is a risk in the fact of having particularly the economy portfolio holder sat on planning. And if there is an acceptance from some members, such as Councillor Miller, who accept that the strategic planning lead should not be sat on planning for obvious reasons, that would surely be exactly the same position for the economic portfolio holder. I say this in the best interest of East Devon District Council and in the knowledge that I've had of the role. It is not a political stance that I have. It is not a personal stance against Councillor Hayward. It is purely from my own position in knowing how the role functions and how you need to be out there through driving that agenda. It is a very dangerous precedent and not one, Madam Chairman, that I will be able to support. Thank you.
Thank you. The names that I still see with blue hands up have all already spoken. I just would like Councillor Howe to just confirm whether or not his blue hand is raised regarding the amendment he made to the amendment. Councillor Howe?
I actually want to put a point of clarification, because one or two people have spoken on various matters, particularly the leader and Councillor Hayward, that I need to point out, and also Councillor Ragg has made points that are not strictly accurate, and I would like to correct them, if I can.
Please.
I think all three of them, one way and another, have mentioned about members with families not wishing to serve on this because of the daytime agenda. Of course, the agenda is set by us as councillors, particularly the chair of the committee. Now, it was moved today's the planning committee, DMC, because it was felt it worked better with officers and the committee structure at the time. But it is at the whim of the chair, in particular with officers. They could do afternoon to evening meetings, as we've had at times as well, or even go back to evenings. I wouldn't recommend that particularly, but nevertheless, it is an option there that can be looked at and can be addressed to make it easier for people with families. But to be honest, because you've got a family doesn't mean you can't make daytime meetings. People meet all days, work all times of day and night these days. So it is not quite a straightforward position to be. So I would like to clarify on that. The other one is Councillor Hayward has also mentioned Team Bridge and various other bits and pieces. Of course, we're not necessarily, we don't have to follow Team Bridge. We don't have to stick with Team Bridge. And neither is it a legal requirement that we don't have cabinet members on these two committees we're talking about. It is a perception. And Councillor Miller in particular, and I'll raise the names, ought to understand the perception of what they are proposing. Now, that is the problem. The public perception is that Cabinet will be controlling these two committees, irrespective of whether they do or don't. And that is the danger that follows.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. That's already been stated by several other councillors. Was that all the clarification?
I think it is, because no one else has picked up on my amendment, so I'll let that lie.
Okay, at this point, I think it would be useful now to hear from the leader, Councillor Arnott, to address the number of points that have been made. Councillor Arnott.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'll try and be brief. Picking up first on Councillor Allen's point, which is a valid one about league members. I hope it's understood, and we haven't really had a chance to explain this yet because of the extreme crisis management situation we've been in the last month, that our intention is to do, and which is why we've got a democracy and transparency portfolio holder, an immediate and urgent review. So, Mike, that doesn't mean that league members have gone forever by any means, and they may well be back, and they may well be back soon. But I hope you'd accept that an awful lot of the people who were down as league members or champions, in fact, ultimately, for whatever reason, did absolutely nothing, not Mike himself. So just to cover off that one. So that's not off the agenda at all in the medium term. It just needs to be reviewed. Looking at Councillor Moulding's points, which have been made elsewhere as well, about perception and risks. And I think his direct question, probably most bluntly stated, is why have I ignored the advice of the monitoring officer? I think that's what he's saying there. Well, I haven't. We had Eileen, Councillor Ragg, and myself and Mr. Williams, the CEO, and Mr. Gordon-Lennox met with other officers, and we discussed this. And what was absolutely clear was that it would be impossible for me to sit on DMC, and it would be impossible for Dan Ledger to sit on DMC as well, for the same reason. That's not to say we desperately wanted to, but that was that. Everything else was legal and covered by the lacuna, the silence in the Constitution, which could have been dealt with at any point in the last 7 years, and I suggest should have been by Councillor Moulding's party in the backwash of the Graham Brown scandal. They simply never dealt with it. So coming to the other point from Councillor Skinner about South Somerset, well, I'd like to thank him for just confirming my point. Yes, they all sit on planning. All cabinet members sit on planning. Now, it's not this administration's fault that this council no longer has 3 regional planning areas, for which I can see a lot of merit. I think one has to look back in history and see why this council decided, on an officer-led decision, I think some years ago, that it wasn't appropriate to continue to have those 3 extremely local, making very local decisions, as a former monitoring officer once said to me. So yes, South Somerset is the case. Cambridge, as has been said by Councillor Ragg, who's very helpfully given the genesis of this idea, from Councillor Connett, and therefore through the LGA. Cambridge has 4. We're in a partnership with them, and it has shown no problems whatsoever. Nobody is rioting in the streets talking about the perception and the risk. So I have not ignored Mr. Gordon Lennox's advice at all. I put it in the balance. And I think yesterday, his own most recent statement of what he feels is absolutely fair enough. It is effectively, literally, a barrister's opinion. And we as a council have to make a decision about whether that is the opinion we must stick with at this stage. And if we choose not to, that is not to the discredit of Mr. Gordon Lennox in the least. I think finally, coming to Councillor Armstrong's point about not understanding what the process of the local government association's planning advisory service would be. Well, first of all, without boring everybody, you'll have seen in emails in recent days that their advice on this restates that it is perfectly possible for cabinet members to sit on planning committees, but it needs to be considered very carefully. So therefore, it is very welcome as part of our ongoing constitutional review that the local government association come in, and many of you would have seen them come in as part of the governance review process last year. The planning advisory service people then sit down with the CEO, they sit down with the monitoring officer, they sit down with lead councillors and anybody else who wants to discuss the future of the governance of our planning committee, and they then come back to us with advice. What we're then able to do, rather than improvising an amendment on the hoof tonight, they are then able to come back to us with firm and settled advice from an independent outside agency. And to me, that is quite clearly in the best interests of this council. And what I'm able to say to you is if they complete, for sake of argument, their processes within the next 3-4 months, and if their advice is then that we should not have cabinet members on planning and licensing, then of course that report will come to full council, and I would imagine it would obtain the unanimous support of council, and we would amend the membership, alter the membership of those committees accordingly. The final point I want to make, forgive me for using this word, is one about the society in which we live. And I know this will be much mocked. When I said earlier that if the amendment passes, I will have to call up 2 working mothers and a key worker in British industry in order to fill the slots on the planning committee, as I hope you don't see, this is the case. And I really don't think some of the more traditional members understand. It's not a question that Democratic Alliance councillors don't have the depth of talent to serve on committees. They're all over all sorts of committees, but a committee that sits all day or all night, or whichever Mike Howe has suggested and hasn't actually managed to change, with great affection to him in the last year, it is a very difficult thing for councillors of a certain age to do. So in conclusion, Chair, I hope I've answered the questions of Councillor Moulding, Councillor Skinner, Councillor Armstrong. Forgive me if there's somebody else, but I will be, as you can imagine, voting against this amendment of Councillor Thomas's. Thank you.
Thank you. I won't be calling anybody else to speak. I think this has gone on for quite a long time. I think we've heard the main issues that people are concerned about. Henry, can I please ask you to confirm where we are, whether we need to now take a vote on the amendment as proposed by Councillor Thomas and seconded by Councillor Bond?
So thank you, Chair. If I perhaps just explain where we are with the situation. So there is an amendment proposed, which would be to include wording within the terms of reference section of the Constitution dealing with committees that would state something along the lines of serving members of Cabinet are not eligible for sitting on the Planning Committee and the Licensing and Enforcement Committee. That's the proposal. However, if that was accepted, that would then be inserted into the draft Constitution, which you would then have a subsequent vote to approve. If it's rejected, then the Constitution remains as presented to you. However, before you get to the vote on the amendment, there was a proposal for a recorded vote. So the first vote that will be taken is a vote to decide whether or not you have a recorded vote on the amendment proposal. So I would suggest that for that, you use your green tick to vote in favour of a recorded vote, and you use your red cross to vote against a recorded vote. The Democratic Services Officer will then tally that up when the vote is called for. The announcement will be made, and if the vote is in favour of a recorded vote, then obviously that will be taken on the amendment vote. Hopefully that's clear. So are you happy to go to the vote, Chair?
Yes, please. Okay.
So councillors, if you are in favour of a recorded vote on the amendment, please tick green. If you are against a recorded vote on the amendment vote, then please tick red cross. So if you can please place your votes, thank you.
I can't find it on my iPad. I'm very sorry. For some reason, it's not there.
Mine's not showing either, Mr. Lennox.
No, me neither.
Well, I'm sure the Democratic Services Officer will confirm, but to me it looks like a clear majority in favour of a recorded vote anyway.
Okay, thank you, sorry.
Is that right? Is that right, Sarah?
Yes, it is. There are 40 votes in favour of a recorded vote.
Okay, so that motion is then carried, which means that the vote on the amendment that is proposed will be a recorded vote, which Sarah will now do. But if you are in favour of the amendment, you'll say for. If you are against the amendment, obviously you say against, or you are entitled to abstain. Before we go to that, oh no, I can deal with that afterwards. So yeah, if you are, as I say, in favour for, if you are against, obviously against. Thank you.
Councillor Allen.
For.
Councillor Armstrong.
For.
Councillor Arnott.
Against.
Councillor Bailey.
For.
Councillor Barrow.
For.
Councillor Bickley.
Against.
Councillor Blakey.
For.
Councillor Bloxham.
For.
Councillor Bond.
For.
Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Cahill.
For.
Councillor Chamberlain.
Against.
Councillor Chapman.
For.
Councillor Chubb.
Very much for.
Councillor Coleman.
Against.
Councillor Davey.
Against.
Councillor Desaram.
For.
Councillor Dent.
For.
Councillor Faithful.
For.
Councillor Gardner.
I won't be voting at this time.
Councillor Gazzard.
Against.
Councillor Hartnell.
For.
Councillor Hawkins.
For.
Councillor Hayward.
Against.
Councillor Hookway.
Against.
Councillor Howe.
For.
Councillor Hughes.
For.
Councillor Ingham.
For.
Councillor Jackson.
Yeah.
Against.
Councillor Jarvis.
For.
Councillor Jeffrey.
Against.
Councillor Johns.
Against.
Councillor Young.
Against.
Councillor Key.
For.
Councillor King.
Against.
Councillor Ledger.
Against.
Councillor Loudon.
Against.
Councillor Manley.
Against.
Councillor McLaughlin.
Against.
Councillor Miller.
Very much against.
Councillor Moulding.
For.
Councillor Parr.
For.
Councillor Pook.
For.
Councillor Pratt.
Against.
Councillor Ranger.
Against.
Councillor Rickson.
Against.
Councillor Rowland.
Against.
Councillor Rylance.
Against.
Councillor Skinner.
For.
Councillor Taylor.
Against.
Councillor Thomas.
For.
Councillor Twist.
Oh, hang on. For.
Councillor Whibley.
Against.
Councillor Woodward.
Against.
Councillor Bragg.
Against.
Councillor Chris Wright.
For.
Councillor Tom Wright.
For.
Can I ask everybody to mute their microphones again, please? Thank you.
Chair, I make the voting 29 votes for, 27 votes against, and 1 abstention.
So, Chair, if I
Thank
may, yeah, so that means that the proposal of including wording in the terms of reference section in the Constitution has been agreed, and therefore what is now presented to you is the Constitution that is in the agenda, the revised Constitution that's in the agenda, along with the amendments that I verbally updated members on at the beginning of the meeting, and to include the wording in the terms of reference for those two committees to prohibit serving cabinet members from sitting. Chair, if I may, I think the only thing that flows from that, which probably needs to be covered off, and I hope the council would agree to, is that there is also then a delegated authority to me to make consequential amendments to the Constitution to deal with that, and I'm happy to do that in consultation with the chair of the council and also the portfolio holder for democracy and transparency. But there are a couple of areas in the Constitution that I will need to look at to make sure that that ties in with that situation. So, yep.
That makes sense, but you don't need a vote on that, presumably.
Well, I would hope that the council would accept that that needs to be part of the recommendation that now goes forward. So the recommendation would be to approve the constitution as is in the papers, along with the amendments that were verbally updated, along with the amendments on the terms of reference for serving cabinet members not to sit, and with the delegated authority for me to deal with the consequential amendments in the constitution in relation to that last one. So if you're happy, Chair, then the vote will be, if you are in favour of that, obviously it is a green tick. If you are against that, it would be a red cross.
Can I just make sure, is there any member who's unsure of what they're voting on? Please make that known now. Otherwise, as instructed, green tick for in favour of what has been summarised by Henry, or a red cross against. Thank you.
Okay, so if we can have the vote then, please. If you can cast your votes.
I can't find my green sticker.
No, neither can I. Can't see it anywhere.
Just hit participants and it drops down.
All right.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't work for me.
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Chair, if there are technical difficulties, we can do it by a roll call vote if you would prefer. It's not a recorded vote, but it's just a roll call vote.
Do we have a majority anyway?
It looks to me like we have. I don't know whether Sarah can confirm what the numbers are.
There are 43 yes and 6 no.
In which case,
44 yes.
Clearly carried anyway. So, Chair, if you're happy, I'm happy that that's a valid vote in favour.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. My intention is to now move on and to try and complete these remaining items in a fairly straightforward manner. So moving on to recommendation 2, part B, recommendation 2, that the council confirms the Conservative group as the formal opposition. I will move the recommendation from the chair. As this is a straightforward matter, I do intend to move straight to the vote.
Chair, if I may, there was the question from Councillor De Sarum that was pushed back into this particular section. If you're happy for me to answer it, I will do.
Yes, please, and potentially if the leader needs to comment on that, then that may be allowed, but yes, please deal with that element.
So the reason for this change, the reason for the change to the constitution was obviously not so long ago, there was a situation where the membership of the groups was very tight and there was no formal mechanism within the council to recognise the opposition. There are consequential issues arising from that. There is the chair of scrutiny, and of course there's remuneration to the opposition party. So this was a way of ensuring that that could be clarified and those procedural elements be dealt with. So there is nothing beyond that in terms of the operation of the council. And I think my advice would be that, as is currently the case, that the issues of the opposition and what might happen in terms of support from within the council is picked up within the governance review working party work, and recommendations will flow from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Therefore, if we're moving straight to the vote?
Chair, can I just interrupt? We do have a speaker, Councillor Skinner.
Okay, I'll accept Councillor Skinner to speak. Can you please keep it brief and very much to the point? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and I will keep it very brief. Does this mean, just for clarity, that there is an acceptance that this is going to be a shadow cabinet? And could the leader please answer the question, if that is the case, are we still continuing with the governance review as to whether we're having cabinet or whatever sort of adoption was going to be looking at taking place? Has that been circumvented by this particular proposal, or where are we exactly?
I don't know whether the leader wants to, but I'm happy to give my perspective. I think I covered it in the first bit, really. But up to you, Chair, whether you want me or the leader or both.
I would definitely like the leader to comment on this. I think this is a matter which may require further consideration. It sounds like we're getting into quite a lot of detail that may not be appropriate. Councillor Arnott, do you want to comment?
Yes, thank you. Briefly, Chair, on that for Councillor Skinner. No, is the answer at this stage. So this is, as I explained earlier, a constitutional amendment to regularise something that, for mysterious reasons, had never been regularised before. If the idea of a shadow cabinet or whatever wants to be advanced by the Conservative group in due course, then of course they can do so, but it forms no part of tonight's debate.
Thank you, Leader.
Thank you. Henry, do you want to move to the vote at this point?
Your decision, Chair. I've got nothing further to say if that's what you were asking.
Yes, please. Let's move vote. Are we voting again using the buttons?
Yes, please. I think that would make sense. So yes, green to confirm the Conservatives the formal opposition, and red to vote against. Please cast your votes. Good number, Sarah.
Sorry, 42, 41 now, 4 and 6 against.
Okay, thank you. That's clearly carried.
Thank you very much. We now need to move on to recommendation 3. Part C, recommendation 3. The council approves the allocation to different political groups of seats to be filled in the overview, regulatory and other committees. These are determined in the table as follows, which is in your agenda papers. I don't intend to read this out. I think if everybody's clear on what those numbers are, this is just simply a matter of accepting that.
Chair, I think you could probably take recommendation 4 as well. I know we had separated them out, but actually they are together. So I think you probably could take that on block.
Okay, recommendation 4, part C, recommendation 4, that council approves the allocation of seats on the individual overview, scrutiny, regulatory and other committees as set out in Appendix 1. So I will
Point of order,
move.
Chair. Point of order. Your previous Part A decision about portfolio holders needs to be taken into account.
Yes, Chair, it does, but that gets taken in at Part E.
Thank you very much, Henry. So once again, we are now going to move to a vote on Part C, recommendation 3, and Part recommendation 4 as well together. So again, using the buttons, can you please vote for using the green button, against using the red?
Sorry to interrupt, but Paul, Councillor Arnott has his hand up to speak. I don't know if he still wants to.
Councillor Arnott?
That's an old hand. Very sorry, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, so if we can please cast green in favour and red against, please. You've got a number, Sarah?
Yes, 50 votes for and 1 vote against.
Thank you. So that is clearly carried.
Thank you. Can I please ask councillors to make sure that their microphones are muted? I can see a number that aren't, and we're hearing some background noise. Right, I think if I'm correct, we are moving on now to recommendation 5, part D, recommendation 5, that council agrees the membership of the Standards Committee and Housing Review Board as detailed in part D of the report, and approves an extension to the appointment of the independent person for a further year. I will move the recommendation from the chair. I would like to go straight to a vote on this item.
Chair, if I may, just to include the earlier amendment, which is that Pat Gore is not sitting on HRB, she's resigned, and that we will need to fill that vacancy.
Thank you very much. So can we please vote?
Green in favour, red against as standard, please. Okay, Sarah?
Yes, 51 votes for and 1 vote against.
Thank you, that's clearly carried.
Thank you. We will now move on to recommendation 6. Other than Cabinet, the committee membership is based on the political balance of the council, and group leaders were invited to put names forward to fill the places available to their group. Part E, recommendation 6 is that members approve the appointments of councillors to committees as set out on the table in Appendix 2. Now, obviously, given the change from this evening, we may need amendments from Councillor Arnott for some of those committees. Am I correct on that?
Yes, Chair, that is the case. You can do it by one of two ways. If Councillor Arnott has the changes that he would like to make, then they can be taken now. I would caveat that just to say that there is a sort of a checklist that sits behind all of this that I will need to go through. But the alternative would be that there is delegated authority. So you approve it as is, but with delegated authority to me to work with the group leader to make those appointments directly, well, not directly after the meeting, but after this meeting. I think my advice would be that you approve the table with delegated authority to me to work with the group leaders to revise those cabinet member positions.
I think that makes sense. I think we will do that. So we will move to a vote based on things as they stand with delegated authority for the changes to be made following the meeting. Can we please vote?
Sarah?
I think all councillors have voted. 51 votes for and 52 votes for and no votes against.
Thank you. That's clearly carried.
Thank you. We will now move on to recommendation 7. The proposals for chairs and vice chairs of committees are set out in the agenda. Please note that the vice chair of the Housing Review Board will be appointed by the board at its first meeting. So part F, recommendation 7, that members approve the appointments of the chairs and vice chairs of the committees as set out in Appendix 3. I suspect this may also require possible changes, perhaps, or not. I've lost track, I have to say myself now.
Yes, this one also requires a change, which is that Councillor Ragg obviously is now precluded from being the chairman of the planning committee. I don't know whether the administration has considered who the replacement chair might be and whether they are now already established on the committee, in which case it could be put forward. If not, then I think it would be another case of having to delegate to me for that approval, if council was happy.
I would be, Chair, can I suggest that I'd be happy to delegate that for the time being in accordance with the process for committees as well.
Thank you, Councillor Arnott. So that's also going to be an addition of delegation to this recommendation. So can we now vote, please, on this? Green tick for yes, red for no.
Sarah?
51 votes for and no votes against.
Thank you again, clearly carried.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. This has been quite a long meeting from what is normally at this time of year quite a straightforward meeting. That brings our meeting to an end, and I'd like to thank everyone, including any members of the public watching online, for taking part. However, can I just remind all those present that the supporting officer will confirm when the meeting is no longer being recorded or going live, and until then, your comments will be live to the public. Thank you very much.